All About Beer receives underwriting support from the Boston Beer Company. They understand the importance of independent journalism in the beer space, and their support helps fund original work. Learn how you can affordably support journalists by visiting allaboutbeer.com/support.
Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Holl. There's a new book out that goes deep into the history of beer in Ireland. It's fascinating and important and fun to read. It's called Filthy Queens, and the author, Christina Wade, is here for a conversation. But first, you're no doubt aware about the fires in the Los Angeles area. They've been devastating. And as per usual, when natural disasters strike, brewers are stepping up with a special beer. Common Space Brewing is spearheading the effort, and you can learn more about the beer and how you can help by following the Instagram account at We Love LA Beer. Additionally, I hope you'll consider supporting All About Beer. There's a number of ways that you can do it, through our Patreon, through our underwriting program, and through advertising. The only way that we can continue to bring you original shows like this, or the All About Beer podcast, or articles on our site is through your support. Please go visit allaboutbeer.com/support to learn more. And thanks to this episode's sponsor.
Attention brewers. Registration is now open for the 2025 Best of Craft Beer Awards. This is a BJCP sanctioned competition judged by fellow brewers and industry leaders. It uses a unique set of style guidelines that champions harmonious and dynamic beers. Held in beautiful Central Oregon, it's the third largest professional brewing competition in North America and is an opportunity to have your hard work evaluated and rewarded. In addition to traditional and specialty beer styles, new this year is the hop water category. Register your beers through January 31, 2025 by visiting bestofcraftbeerawards.com/register. Don't delay. Learn more and get your beers signed up by visiting bestofcraftbeerawards.com/register.
Today's episode is brought to you by Stomp Stickers. Stomp is a proud member of the Brewers Association that produces a wide variety of printed brewery products, such as beer labels, keg collars, coasters, beer boxes, and much more. Stomp's website features an easy-to-use digital design tool, low quantity orders, fast turnaround times, and free domestic shipping. Visit stompstickers.com and use code ThinkBeer for 15% off of your first order. When you visit allaboutbeer.com, you can find original articles, reviews, news, insights, and podcasts. You can listen to shows like Brewer to Brewer and the All About Beer podcast simply by searching All About Beer wherever you listen to shows. And make sure that you follow All About Beer on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Facebook at All About Beer. Beer history can be tough to nail down without the proper research. Thankfully, Dr. Christina Wade is here to unpack the story of beer in Ireland. Her new book has just been released, and it covers about 1,500 years of beer on the Emerald Isle, warts and all. And along the way, she uncovers great stories, advancements, and how humanity evolved with its favorite drink. It's hard not to have an appreciation for the next Irish pint you have after reading this book. Wade is a beer historian specializing in the hidden histories of the brewing trade, especially the role of women. She received her doctorate in history from Trinity College in Dublin in 2017 and wrote The Devils in the Draft Lines, 1,000 Years of Women in Britain's Beer History, which was published last year, 2024, by Camera Books. She's a certified beer judge. She's also the resident historian, audio editor, and co-host of the Beer Ladies podcast. And she founded the Ladies Craft Beer Society of Ireland in 2013, which has now grown to be over 1,400 members. The book we're talking about, it's called Filthy Queens, A History of Beer in Ireland, and it's published by Nine Bean Rose and is available where fine books are sold. Here's our conversation. Christina, thanks for being on the show this week. Thanks for being here. Thank you for writing this book, first and foremost. And I wanted to start with some of the walks you and George were taking where you were talking out the idea for this book. Because anybody who's written a book before, I know there's that one or two things that starts to scratch around in the back of the brain saying, there might be more to this. There might actually be a book in this. And then sometimes it happens and then sometimes it doesn't. And in the case of this book, it did. So as you were out with George walking and talking out what this book would eventually become, What were those first one or two inklings that led you to this? Like, what were the wow, there might actually be a book in this thoughts or facts or
Yeah,
whatever they were?
I think one of the first big ones was coming across um, Barnaby Rich's A New Description of Ireland, which is where I get the name of the book, which I'm sure we'll go into.
Oh,
And
yeah.
just his and his just diatribe against alewives in Dublin, and then looking at sort of all of the Ulster myth cycle myths stories talking about ale, and then Saint Bridget and her mythical, giant lake of beer that people drink for all eternity in heaven. And I was just like, there's something here. There's definitely something here. And of course, George agreed because, he's a dog and he agrees with everything I say. So, and yeah, and just kept kind of going from there, just kind of thinking and playing it out and seeing if there was any interest in a book like that. Was also, if I write this, is this something people would be interested in reading?
I guess there's challenges to that certainly as well. So I'm glad you found a publisher who is interested in this. Because as I said, I thank you for writing this book because it is this really fascinating history of, I guess, the way that beer has always been a part of humanity, or for a very long time, and how its past relates to our present and maybe beyond. But the thing, and I guess we should talk about Filthy Queens, and women's role in beer, in brewing, in as a chore, as a like a thing that needed to be done. But then also, I feel like in the last maybe century plus, the erasure of women's roles in this,
Mm.
and as it has become, a male dominated industry, in a lot of ways, both as consumers and the marketing efforts towards, and a lot of people who work in and around the industry. But the title of the book grabs you immediately. And I know that's one of the reasons that you did it. But then the substance is obviously there. So uh, walk us through Filthy Queens without giving too much away, because I'm going to encourage people to go and buy this and read this, obviously.
Yeah, so I'll just hint at where the title came from. So, as I said about Barnaby Rich was an English army captain. And despite having no qualifications whatsoever, he decided that he was going to write this book about Ireland after moving to Dublin to spend his final quarter of his life or years of his life. And so he wrote this book called A New Description of Ireland. And I won't get too far into it, but one of the things he does is he has this diatribe against the alewives of Dublin, and he calls them most filthy queens, amongst other things. But unlike other circumstances, so in England, like John Skelton wrote The Tunning of Eleanor Rumming and
Mm-hmm.
stories like that, where they take, aim at alewives. Of course, to caveat that with, they also took aim at millers and bakers and anyone sort of involved in victualling. Alewives just got that extra layer of misogyny on top. But it didn't go over well, and he had to write an apology a couple years later. So you can imagine how frosty things were for him in Dublin if he's now having to apologize to these alewives and their husbands. And I spent a lot of time talking specifically about what Rich said because he had a lot more to say than just
Yeah.
calling them queens. But I really liked the fact that he tried to label them this, and then there was this pushback. And the pushback was significant enough that he had to apologize for it. And so when I was telling my friends this over a couple of pints, they were like, "Oh, I'm a filthy queen. I want to be a filthy queen. Like, this is awesome." And I was like, "Okay, that has to be the book title." It's sort of reclaiming, I guess, the insult, you know?
Yeah. And I mean the misogyny that exists again in and around beer even still today, unfortunately. The the pushback at the time to this, I don't know enough about history, but it does feel extraordinary. It does feel like fighting the patriarchy in a way. And I'm wondering, what was owed to that pushback in such a vehement way,
I think, to be
and what
honest,
we
a
can
lot of it
and what we
had,
can learn from it. Yeah.
yeah, well, honestly, a lot of it had to do with the women being married to aldermen, um, or highly high-ranking men in Dublin. And so they weren't going to allow their wives to be besmirched like this. And so I think everybody else kind of tumbled in to it. And at the end, well, I didn't actually say all that. I wasn't talking about the good women. I was talking about those other women. And he tries to separate, group women into different categories. I wasn't talking about these aldermen's wives, these honest housewives. I was talking about these other women. And like I've said, I read the book Barnaby. You were talking about everybody, but okay. And so I think a lot of it had to do with this fact that these people that were in positions of privilege could use that privilege to push back. And I think, we can see that now. If you have the position to be able, or the privilege to be able to push back, you should. And people in those positions should absolutely use that to do so, because we can see that it worked here, and it
Yeah.
does work now.
And there's always kind of these, like, wormy guys who will say, or anybody who tries to do this, who will try to, well, that's not what I really meant, and then try to put the spin on it. But when it's in black and white, and your name's attached to it, it's a little more difficult to run
Mm.
away with it. I assume, right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, that's what happened in this case, at least. Um, as you started to dive into that a little bit more and started to think about, beer's place today, were there correlations between then and now that you were able to see, and lessons that we should all learn from the past to try to put into play today?
I mean, I think there's a lot of things that are involved in ale drinking or brewing that seem very, I think that's why beer is a really good medium to look at history, because we can relate to it, or many of us can relate to it. You know, people 1,000 years ago drank at funerals like we do at wakes here in Ireland.
Yeah.
They drink at weddings like we drink at weddings, christenings, when you're having a bad day, when you're talking to your friends. One of the triads of Ireland I really relate to, which is this story about, or this series of three things that this author was writing about, and each thing he would list three things. And this was in the medieval period. And one of the things that he said was a really nice, wonderful experience to have was an ale and a hot bath. And I think a
Ooh.
lot of us, I mean, I think there's like entire Instagram accounts that are, or were at one point, devoted to like shower beers.
Oh
So I
yeah.
think we can really relate to a lot of these things. Like we can see ourselves in stories of people gathering together at a pub or an ale house, having a couple beers, and we can see ourselves in, oh yeah, after a long day, especially in a rainy day here in winter, there's nothing better than maybe like a nice ale, maybe like a Flanders red and like a hot bath. Like that sounds
Ooh,
excellent. So
that does
we
sound
can,
excellent.
right? So
See,
we know we know that that's familiar to us. And so for me, it's a great way to sort of look at history. And so the book, and I really feel, is not just a book about the history of beer, but it's the history of Ireland through beer, through that lens. So that way it's something you can kind of ground yourself to, something you're familiar with. It doesn't seem so novel, or something you can't quite relate to.
um, So, all right. So let's talk about Ireland then, because I wanted to get to this, and I wanted to sort of do the dumb guy question that I don't at all mean, but it's like history of beer in Ireland. It's is Guinness. Like, how long can this book actually be? So when we take the world's most famous stout out of the equation, for just a minute, um, how important is beer in Ireland?
Oh, so important. Um, like, are we talking about now or historically or whenever?
So let's talk about now in the way
Now.
that it relates to what you lay out in the book.
Yeah, so I moved here, we're coming up on 14 years. And I think that beer still plays a central role in so many things here in very similar ways that it has historically. Like I've said before, you commiserate with your friends over pints. That's something people did in the past. Weddings, funerals, but it's just small things either as well. You network over pints, and they did that historically. You find jobs over pints. You had a bad day, you go to the pub, you talk to your friends. It's a great medium that we can still find ourselves using in so many ways that they did historically. It's still an important part, as is the pub, of community space, of making friendships, of finding relationships. It's an important part of Irish culture.
And this, I mean, the stereotypes that exist, and being of Irish descent, and playing into some of those, or having relatives that live, sort of that, that stereotypical, Irish way. Um, is that how does that build up over time? You're talking about it being a part of everyday life of the pub, and I'm not talking about, like, extreme drunkenness, but the Irish like to drink, or the Irish like to be out at the pub, or whatever it is. Like, do you see, like, when that starts to become part of the experience, like part of the, like, the full on culture?
Yeah, so I
I
think,
don't know if I'm phrasing this the right way. Yeah. I'm not trying to call everybody drunks, because I don't mean it that way.
yeah,
But there
uh,
is this sort of, like, we're going out, like, we had a good day, we had a bad day, we're seeing we're doing all this type of thing, and it becomes this. No matter where you are in the world, there's an Irish pub, and you're going to walk in, and you're going to have a really good time, and it's just because the Irish are attached to that.
yeah, so I think there's like a couple of different ways to approach this question. I would first say that, going out and the pub being the center of community is not unique to Ireland. It's in Scotland, it's in England, it's in, plenty of other cultures as well, as this being this sort of center for your community. Um, so it's not just an Irish thing, and people have been sort of enjoying drinking here for centuries. There's um, a poem called Satire that I talk about in this book, and it's in this series of these poems that were written in the early 14th century, and it's definitely meant to be read out loud, probably possibly in an ale house or somewhere where people are drinking. And he says, be glad, drink deep. So we can kind of see this idea of, having fun with your friends. And, there's drinking in halls, there's drinking in parties, there's drinking at all of these sorts of events. It's a really important part of ritual, and it's still an important part of our rituals today. And so I think that has been there. But again, that's not particularly unique to Ireland. That's in England, that's in Scandinavia, that's all over in many European contexts. So drinking has always been an important part of social rituals throughout many parts of Europe. So again, that's not unique to Ireland.
Sure.
I think part of it is the Irish diaspora after the famine, or during the famine, or the Great Hunger. And so people wanted to find their community in their new places. They built these places so that way they could find the community in a new country. And they did, and Irish pubs can be synonymous now with kind of a nice, relaxing, sort of a safe place. I think a lot of people kind of view them as. Now, I'm not going to get into the sort of stereotypical things that happen around that, or sometimes they're kind of co-opted by big commercial ideologies, and there's a lot of sort of nasty Irish stereotypes that can and some prejudice that can come into play. But I do think that a lot of that has to do with finding your community in a new country, and sort of the affinity. I mean, we can see the affinity globally people have for Irish culture, right?
Yeah. And again, I don't want to play. If I said that question indelicately, I didn't mean it that way, because it is always been for me more about conviviality and like a sense of welcome and a sense of fun, as opposed to the the knockdown drag out, like we're all just going to get wasted kind of thing. Like a Simpsons episode or something. But there is I think more even than like, the British pubs or even like Scandinavian drink, there's something about beer drinking in Ireland wherever you are. Like if there's Irish and there's beer together, no matter where it is, that there is this, I don't know, sense of community, sense of welcome, even for outsiders. And I guess that's sort of where I was trying to get with, like, in your research, like, is it just, people are looking for other people, or was there something else that sort of happened along the way that, I don't know, like helped the Irish get this welcoming reputation?
Yeah, so that was actually a huge thing. So hosting and making people feel welcome was written into laws, like early Brehon laws and early Irish medieval law tracts. So hosting is a really big deal, and it's still a big deal here, even in small ways. So like if you go to someone's house, it's, do you want a tea? Are you sure? Would you go on, go. The famous Mrs. Doyle from Father Ted. Go on, go on, go on, go on. Hospitality is really important, very important, and also famously music and storytelling. And these things, again, in early medieval sources, we hear the alehouse should be a place for art. There should be people telling stories. There should be music. And this continues on. So we have this amazing tradition of Irish music, a famous country of storytellers, saints and scribes. So it's not just, it is this experience. And I'm not saying, if you go to your typical Irish pub, you're not going to get storytelling and music. You might get it occasionally, here and there, but typically, you're sitting there at having your pint, talking to your friends, maybe talking to some new friends, that kind of thing. It's not this, there's not live music all the time everywhere,
Right.
But it does happen. I mean, let's be clear. In non-tourist places, there are absolutely, live music, and people come together and they all bring their own instruments and people play, and it's a wonderful, and that's across the country, and they get together and they do that. And it's very spontaneous, and or the pub will have, okay, an X, Y, and Z day, we have this, and people come in and play. So that's wonderful. But I'm just saying it's not 24/7.
Of course.
kind
Yeah.
of a thing. But there is this importance on, the pub being this cultural space for the arts as well, for music, which is so important, and dancing, and and storytelling. I mean, it's not necessarily a case of like one person sitting down and everybody gathers around and listens to them, but like when you're at the pub, you're swapping stories with your friends, you're telling stories with your friends. I mean, of course, we do that in the U.S., we do that all over the world, but it is an
Yeah.
important part of pub culture is sharing stories with your friends and having sort of that kind of community thing. So I think, well, the pub's never just a pub, right? So it's the center of community. I think the Irish pub is perhaps unique because of the importance of hospitality, which has been a part of Irish culture for centuries. Well, millennia, actually, if we
Yeah.
really want to. And I think that probably transpires in an authentic Irish pub, in a real Irish pub, you walk in, oh, how are you, how, blah blah blah, and you can sit and talk to the bar staff, if you're there on your own. In a lot of places. Now, again, not everywhere, because it's Dublin. It's really busy. So if it's really busy, it's like every other city. You're not going to have that time and space to do that. And of course, we've got craft beer pubs, and we've got a little bit faster paced stuff. But there are definitely places where you can sit down and have a chat. Um, like, I guess you can do that in anywhere, kind of small town, right? But I think it's a nice thing to do when you can find a place like that. But again, I think that's down to sort of a small town versus a big city kind of a thing, I suppose. But I do think that there is a specific emphasis on hospitality here.
Yeah, and just that it was built into laws, that it was built into the societal expectations of each other. Even if it's not happening, Friday night, 10 p.m. in Dublin, it is still ingrained writ large for the country.
Yeah, and to be clear, there's a lot of still, like the craft beer community here, of which I'm a part of, is really close. It's like, when I moved here, however many years ago, um, they welcomed me with open arms really quickly. I started the Ladies Craft Beer Society of Ireland in 2013, and they just opened their arms to like having brewery tours or beer dinners or things like that. So there's absolutely this sense of community in beer now as well. So I think that also adds a nice layer. And if you go to the same pubs a lot here, you'll get to know the bar staff, and they're all lovely people. So I think, yeah, I think there's definitely like a community in beer and brewing in Ireland now as well.
I like that. Um, what I was struck with going through this book, and I'll admit, not being a great student in the past, like I am probably going to have to read this again to make sure that I fully absorbed everything, because there's a lot of knowledge, there is a lot of information put into this very well designed book, but covering what, close to 2,000 years, 1,500 years, something like, it's
Yeah.
there's a lot of information in there. And what I was so excited to see, just as a reporter, was there's a lot of great source material, and I have to imagine that when you were writing this book, one passage would lead you someplace else, would then lead you someplace else, would lead you someplace else, for it all to come together. Is that fair enough? Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. I love to follow a tangent.
So was there a tangent that you came across unexpectedly in this book that led to something unexpected, or rediscovering something, or you know that you just had one of those holy shit moments, in a library somewhere?
Oh, I'm thinking. So actually, I think Well, I would say that originally it was the Filthy Queens with Barnaby Rich really led me down a huge um, led rabbit hole, as they say, looking for, okay, well, Barnaby's saying this, but what do the laws say? Like, does this back it up? And then finding out, oh wow, actually, maybe it does. And sort of like looking then through, looking through all these medieval legal texts and trying to kind of put that all back together. That was really interesting. I think the legal case of sort of DZ and Co., this brewery in the 19th century, and looking at all the women that owned the brewery and finding out that one of the women not only owned the brewery, but she was managing the brewery, which means she was there, and then kind of following that out to its conclusion in a lawsuit. And those were really good tangents to go down, because then from there I was like, oh, okay, so I find her here, and then I'm going to look, to see were there any other women brewing. And then I got my hands on these directories from the late 1700s and the 1800s, and I'm looking and I'm finding, oh gosh, look at all these women. There are women here. Um, and oh, it's this man, and here's this address, and then 4 years later it's a woman at the same address. Oh, same last name. She's the widow. Okay. And kind of finding those connections, and it just kept spiraling and spiraling. So lots of tangents.
And as you're getting led down these paths, right? There wasn't a ton of like existing information on this all in one place, right? Like you had to kind of cobble this together to be able to tell the story.
Yeah, so there's been a paper here and there on certain
Hmm.
topics, who I cite in the book, but there wasn't a sort of survey of Irish beer history from, the beginning of written history until modern times. So a lot of it was me starting from complete scratch and trying to put this. I mean, the book took me 7 years to write.
I was going to ask.
Um,
Okay.
7 years to research and write. Now, in fairness, I wrote my first book while I was working on this book. So for 3 years, I was writing two books at the same time. Um, but for the most part, of the better part of the last 7 years, I've
Good
spent
Lord,
researching and writing this.
how are you able to form sentences and put them together? Like, it is anybody who's written a book who is just listening to you say that right now. There needs to be some sort of writer canonization, um, or psychiatric ward commitment. Like it's one or the other. For that, holy shit. The other book is on British beer, right? I don't have my note in front of me on that, but yeah,
Yeah. So it's The Devils and the Draft Lines, 1,000 Years of Women in Britain's Beer History. And I wrote that with Camera, the Campaign for
sure,
Real Ale.
yeah,
And that came out last March.
okay. Um, are there were there things that are there? What's the right term for this? Are there correlations between that book and this book? Like,
Oh, absolutely.
is there, yeah. I mean, I'm not saying you shared, the same information, but like, was what was happening in that book also applicable to what was happening in this current book? Boy, I am
Uh,
not phrasing questions well today. I'm acting like this is my first time talking to somebody about a book. So you write words. I apologize. I guess, is history universal when it comes to this, or
no,
are there noticeable differences between countries, even how close they might be during the same
yeah,
period of time? Okay.
and there are noticeable differences. Uh, I get you. No, I'm picking up what you're putting down. I get you.
No,
Uh,
it's indelicate. I'm just, good Lord, I am. It's not. I can't even claim that it's early in the day or then I haven't had coffee. This is just, and I haven't even had a beer yet. So good Lord, this is just bad me on
no,
a Monday afternoon. All right, yeah, keep going. Please save me, Christina.
No, it's one of the things that's actually really interesting, of course, because we know England invaded and colonized Ireland for 800 years of oppression. And you would think, because, well, they originally colonized, and then, a lot of the people that originally came here adopted a lot of Irish customs. So then they had to come, or they didn't have to, but they decided to, unfortunately, try to reconquer, and succeeded to reconquer Ireland in the 16th century. And so you would think, perhaps, that the situation in England would be very similar to the situation in Ireland, as particularly in the colonies, and it wasn't. And I think that's really interesting, how that kind of works together. And then you actually even see then in the late 18th and 19th, or in not the late 18th, but in the 18th century and into the early 19th century, this sort of association of Irish porter with patriotism, and this rejection of English porter, and how political lines are divided into this sort of English versus Irish porter, and later Catholic versus Protestant porter, and how politics in Ireland in the 19th century are very much entwined with beer and brewing. And so they're countries that are close to each other, but their beer starts to rival each other in this period. And then, of course, going back, ale and beer were used as part of these invading colonizer armies, as well as armies and fighters of Irish descent. So ale plays this really important role in war, and also in peace rituals, that we talked about sort of before, these weddings and these funerals and things like that. But also in the context of colonization. So it's a very different dynamic that we find ale and beer being deployed in Ireland than, say, other contexts which don't have this active, they're not colonies by the English. They're not, invaded and colonized. So we have a very unique situation going on here in the island of Ireland.
I like that. I mean, I need to, I didn't know about the camera book until I read it in your bio. So now I need to go and read that one and try to understand it as well. I wanted so as you were going down these tangents, right, and you're doing all of this research, and you're finding, you're connecting the dots yourself. Um, I, as a historian, I'm wondering what you make of today's record keeping. You said you're involved in the Irish craft beer scene. You're obviously out and about, and you're talking to a lot of folks. I don't know if this is a call to action. I don't know if this is something that you think about, but like, for the next generation of historians that come, that want to chronicle, beer or anything really, but let's just focus on beer for a minute. How do you see the record keeping playing out today, and what would you like to see brewers do better?
Yeah, I would like, so I was really inspired by Teresa McCullough,
Sure.
who,
Of the Smithsonian, yeah, when she was there, yeah.
yeah, and her and I are both on the League of Historians at the Beer Culture Center.
Hmm.
And so I have listened to her and talked to her at length, and her experiencing and experience with acquiring materials and archiving materials. And when she talked about if you have labels and things from COVID, when you guys are ordering boxes and beer boxes into your house and things like that, you should keep that stuff. And it just went, oh, my brain went, oh wow, yeah, we really should be keeping all this stuff. And I currently have, I think, 3 or 4 boxes of bottles in my living room. Many of from defunct breweries in Ireland. And I have this grand plan, but I would like some funding. So if anyone wants to throw some funding our way, it'd be great
Keep
to
talking.
kind of
Yeah.
to kind of create a sort of Irish digital museum, at least to start to get all of this craft beer archived, and to do a similar project to what Teresa McCullough did so amazingly in the US, which is going around and talking to all of the people, getting those sort of oral histories and creating sort of a digital tool for future historians, because I think it's one amazing thing about the historian, scholars, archivists in Ireland is that a lot of this stuff is digitized and it's free to access. And I can't tell you as an independent scholar how amazing that is. And that's another reason. When you look at a lot of the citations in my book, they are things that you can find that you don't have, there's not a paywall for.
Right.
And I tried to specifically use things that aren't paywalled. So that way people who are independent researchers or who are just like, this is interesting, I want to learn more, can easily access that. And so again, I would like to create something for future historians that isn't paywalled. So that's why we need funding. Maybe we need advertisers or something or another. So it's not a cost to users, but that we can maintain and build. And so, yeah, I've got these crates of beer bottles that I'm just hoping to turn into something.
It's brewery chic. Uh yeah, no, I like that. Anybody who's listening who has funding, get on that. But I guess that's for historians and everything else like that. Is there a call to action to brewers on what they should be saving? You mentioned the COVID labels when Teresa was talking about that, but I'm always trying to encourage folks when I'm talking to them of document everything, and don't just use Instagram as your repository for this, but write memories down now and again, or keep a journal of the company history. And that's great, but then where do those go afterwards, I guess is the thing. Is it local universities? Is it this repository like you're talking about? Is there but I guess from a historian perspective, what's your call to action to brewers to
Yeah.
make your job easier, and then future generations of historians jobs easier, and maybe not even easier, but more complete, more rounded, more information's never a bad thing.
Yeah, and I think the thing is people are like, might think, what's someone gonna be interested in this, and you'll find that even the littlest things, like, we changed the hops to this because it's cheaper. Well, if we can see that across many different breweries, then there's someone's thesis, in 50 years about that. In 2020, everybody stopped using this and started using this. Why? So, little things like everything. I mean, if I had my way, I'd tell you to keep everything, but I would in particular keep, labels. If you are changing your branding, keep your old branding, because it's really interesting to trace that. If your recipes are changing, keep that. I would, exactly like you said, I would take notes. If you've changed your distribution, if you're now inspired by new recipes, maybe talk about that. Definitely keep track of what recipes you're making, why you're making them, things like that, because we can say, look at this trend or this pattern, but it's little things. It's also, we're now in this pub, and we're doing really well in this town, and we're doing really well here, and these are some of the events that we're doing, and it's, oh gosh, yeah, I keep everything.
Yeah.
But and you can digitize a lot of that stuff, if you don't want to keep the papers laying around. But I would say keeping some of the original stuff would be great. But and taking notes, but gosh, brewing it's a lot of work as it is, and then all the cleaning, and then in this really competitive market, especially after COVID and the hits of the market, probably the last thing you're thinking of is taking notes about your beer. But if you happen to be doing that anyway, or if you have a napkin where you just wrote some thoughts about a beer one time, like all that stuff is a future thesis for somebody.
That's incredible. Yeah, thank you. It's you know what to do now, brewers. Um, so I've been asking folks, I'm mindful of your time. I know you've been at it all day talking about this book, but I've been asking folks on the show for a while now the green door question. And there's a television show called The Good Place. And as I imagine you've been working on two books at once, you haven't been watching a lot of TV, but or you've been watching all of the TV and then cramming it on deadline, which is what I would do if I was writing a book, or cleaning the house or the apartment or reorganizing closets or all of the things that happen as deadlines start to come up. But the green door question from The Good Place is essentially on the last season of the show. They introduce the concept of the green door, where the characters can walk through it and be anywhere they want, doing whatever they want to be doing. So if we had a green door on our plane of existence and this conversation ended and you could walk through it and be at any pub or any brewery anywhere in the world, where would you want to go? Who would you want to be with? And what would you like to be drinking?
Oh, that's a really good question. Um, well, I'd want to be drinking with my girls, the beer ladies. So I'd bring all them. And I think I'd have to say Dagare in Bruges.
Love it. And just
Yeah.
whatever they had on offer that day.
Oh, they have a million things.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And the nice little cheese and basically just Bruges. There are so many really good pubs in Bruges. So probably Bruges, just all of the pubs in Bruges.
That's as good an answer as as anybody has ever given. The book is called Filthy Queens: A History of Beer in Ireland. I cannot stress enough how engaging this is for beer nerds, for history nerds, for people who like anthropology and culture and intrigue and shit talking. And I mean there's really something I think for everybody in this book, and I'm so happy that you wrote it and that it's out in the world for all of us. Dr. Christina Wade, thank you for being on the show this week. And I'll say that the book is from Nine Bean Rose as the publisher, and it is now available wherever good books are sold.
Thank you so much for having me. This was wonderful.
Questions, comments, guest suggestions? It's easy. You can email me. It's johnholl@allaboutbeer.com. That's JOHNHOLL. And I do my best to respond to every email. The only way we can keep doing this show, our other shows, and to pay writers for original articles on allaboutbeer.com is with your help. So please go visit the website, allaboutbeer.com/support, to learn more. On the website, you can check out the podcast page, the merch page, read great new content, as well as the archives, which go all the way back to 1979. And you can keep up with us on social media, as much as we do, at All About Beer. Before we run, here is a word from this week's sponsor. Don't stop at just stickers and labels. Stomp Stickers has everything you need for festival season. From canopy tents to flags to table covers and banners, it's all waiting for you on their website. Check out their brewery section for the full lineup.
Attention brewers, registration is now open for the 2025 Best of Craft Beer Awards. This is a BJCP sanctioned competition judged by fellow brewers and industry leaders. It uses a unique set of style guidelines that champions harmonious and dynamic beers. Held in beautiful Central Oregon, it's the third largest professional brewing competition in North America and is an opportunity to have your hard work evaluated and rewarded. In addition to traditional and specialty beer styles, new this year is the hop water category. Register your beers through January 31, 2025 by visiting bestofcraftbeerawards.com/register. Don't delay. Learn more and get your beers signed up by visiting bestofcraftbeerawards.com/register.
One last reminder about the All About Beer podcast channel. Just search and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. Steal This Beer has new episodes every Monday, and the BYO Nano podcast comes out on the 15th of every month. And make sure you check out probrewer.com each week for original articles from the All About Beer team. As for this show, Nate Weber does our music, Jeff Quinn designed our logo, and I'm John Holl. New episodes release every Wednesday, and that's when I'll be back again to drink beer and to think beer.